Hello friends, I wonder what the ingredients are that go to make up a really great traditional jazz performance in your opinion. If you have any particular ideas, you may care to let me know by putting them in the comments under this video when you've heard what I've got to say. But for the time being, I'm going to let you know what I feel are some of the important ingredients that produce the kind of performance that we hear from a really great jazz band such as Tuba. First of all, do they need to rehearse a lot? Well, I would say it's a bad thing to over-rehearse because the performance can become a bit too stiff. It loses the freedom and looseness that we associate with the best traditional jazz. If you rehearse so much that you know every note more or less, you might just as well be playing from printed music. Well, I do know that Tuba do rehearse, but not by any means as much as most bands, most rehearsing bands that is. But obviously it's essential with their more complicated tunes to work out exactly what's going to happen and to make sure they're all playing from the same pattern of chords. And to perhaps decide the arrangements for the order of events and so on. And if by any chance they are learning a new tune that one of them has composed, as often happens, then obviously they've got to rehearse it. They've all got to study the music and get it into their heads and again work out how they're going to tackle it. So a certain amount of rehearsing, I might really call it preparation rather than rehearsing, I think is quite important. But I know there are some bands that never rehearse and they still sound reasonably good in performance. But I think for that extra little bit of slickness, especially with more complicated tunes, it does pay to rehearse. You can agree things such as introductions and endings to pieces and other little incidental features such as that. Now this next thing that I think helps with the performance is to avoid using too much amplification. I don't like seeing a lot of electrics involved. I love to hear the music pure with all the genuine tones of the instruments coming through. It's the sort of effect you get if you go to hear the jazz band in Preservation Hall in New Orleans, where you've got that lovely sort of wooden acoustic and you hear every instrument clearly. I know it's not always possible to play without amplification. Sometimes there's a huge audience and instruments need to have their microphones in front of them. But even then, I think it's very important to try to achieve a really good balance and never allow one or two instruments to dominate. On the whole, though, I'm against amplification wherever possible. And very often with small indoor venues, you can do without it. The next thing, all tunes have melodies, and the tunes that have survived have very good melodies. The test of time really is that we still love them, we still play them. And at all times when playing, the melody should come through. I know this is jazz, there's a lot of improvising and so on, but we should still, if we're going to get the soul of the music, which really is the melody, we should hear it even if it is caressed and decorated in wonderful, almost an infinite variety of ways in the course of a performance. We had in England a lovely clarinet player called Chris Blount, and sadly he died quite a few years ago, all too young, but I did have the pleasure of meeting him a few times, and he said to me once, "You must bring out the soul in the music, otherwise it's just a load of notes." And I've never forgotten that expression, it's just a load of notes, and I think it's very important to avoid that effect. The next thing is tempo, getting the tempo right at the start of the tune. Each tune has it, and interpretation of it has its own characteristics. So some tunes can be played slowly or quickly, and they work well both ways. Others just seem to call for a certain tempo, or sometimes the singer wants a particular tempo. But it's very, very important to get it right, and especially not to let the tempo drag once it's established. I'm aware of quite a few bands who spoil their performances by gradually getting slower rather than holding the tempo as the tune goes on. So I think that's another feature of really good jazz. And with Tuba Skinny, once they establish the tempo, which they do very meticulously, you know they stick to it rigidly throughout the entire performance. So that's another feature, I think, of really good traditional jazz. I would just make the exception, the late Ken Collier, another great English jazz man, used to talk about controlled acceleration rather than speeding up. Now, speeding up unintentionally is really not very good. But if you are building up a little bit more excitement, particularly towards the end of a tune, then a very small degree of controlled acceleration, I think, is permissible, but not the opposite. Very rare is slowing down a good way of improving a tune. By the way, while I'm on the subject, one particular song, I don't know why it is, but On the Sunny Side of the Street has often struck me as one of those that's particularly prone to dragging and getting slowed down. It's important to keep it bouncy, but I've noticed 2 or 3 bands who lose it as they go on, and it gets slower and slower, and in the end it's become a bit of a dirge. I don't know why, it's just something about that particular tune. Right, the next thing, of course, is the collective improvisation, which is absolutely magnificent in Tuba Skinny. I don't know whether all the players are thinking of the chords and working round them all the time. I don't think they are. I think it's more intuitive than that. But if you listen to the clarinet decorating the cornet, or the cornet in the background decorating the trombone solo or whatever, they are always on the chord and beautifully running around it. This is absolutely wonderful. And the other thing about collective improvisation is the instruments in a good performance don't trespass on each other's territory. For example, if you get a clarinet player who is so often actually playing the melody, which the trumpet is supposed to be playing, well, I call that trespassing, and it also spoils the effect of the performance. And it does happen quite a lot. But if you listen again to Tuba Skinny, it does not happen. You don't get them both playing the same notes, or trombone doing that as well. It just doesn't happen. What I do like to hear, though, is, let's say, one instrument leading on a chorus plays a little phrase, and then either the trombone or the clarinet perhaps echoes it and develops it. This proves that the musicians are really listening to each other and having a kind of conversation, responding to each other. I think that is also a feature of really fine traditional jazz. It's very important that the musicians all know what each other is doing and can hear it and respond to it. As I say, having a sort of conversation through the music. Here's another interesting point. We often talk about rhythm sections, but I think it's important if the whole band sees itself as all part of one grand rhythm section, because even the trombone, the trumpet are involved in such things as syncopation and counterpoint and rhythmic patterns, particularly when they're backing each other. So really the whole band is controlling the rhythm all as a unit. So I think it's really, in a sense, wrong. I know for convenience, we talk of the rhythm section and the front line. I've spoken before, incidentally, how I don't like to see a front line and a back line. I prefer to see an arc of musicians where they're all looking at each other. But anyway, if every musician considers himself as part of the rhythm section, I think that helps a lot with the performances as well. And then there are all those little devices that we get in traditional jazz, like bending the notes and getting nice bluesy effects on notes. And in the case of the trombone, using the glissandi, leading into the next chord from the end of one bar into the start of the next bar. Barnabas is absolutely brilliant at that. Listen out for him constantly doing it, and it's important in moving the tune along to the next chord all the time, if the trombonist can emphasize that change in the bass note. So things like glissandi, and then the breaks, of course, where you have a sudden stop and somebody does a couple of bars of decoration. Some bands mess them up, perhaps the drummer thumps away all the way through of a clarinet doing a 2-bar break. But with Tuba Skinny, they always all know who is going to take the break. The breaks are taken very, very neatly, and in some cases even they have been rehearsed so that they precisely copy breaks from, let's say, King Oliver's band and some of the kind of recordings they are recreating today. So the breaks are very important to get right. And then in the improvisations, and here I'm getting a bit technical, if you don't know anything about music you won't know what I'm talking about, but when they are improvising, if they can play on the sixths and the ninths of chords quite a lot, whether consciously or unconsciously, I always think that is pretty clever as well. It's all too easy just to go through the three notes, the three main notes of a chord, and improvise around them. But if you can decorate on the sixth and the ninth, as you'll often hear Shay doing, for example, in Tuba Skinny, I think that's a sign of really good improvising. I don't think, by the way, it's important to just show off in an improvisation. I much prefer to be thinking of music rather than virtuosity and just demonstrating how technically good you are. Now, on this whole matter of improvising solos, I do not really enjoy the kind of band performance where one after another each member of the band plays a whole 32-bar chorus or even 2 choruses and doesn't really do much that's interesting with those choruses. I think that, and incidentally, I'm not too impressed if I get raucous, flashy solos and screaming high notes. I much prefer the sort of thing that Tuba Skinny do, which is keeping the solos fairly short. For example, if they've got a 32-bar chorus, usually one of them will play the first 16 bars and the other one the next 16 bars. And also, while the person is playing a pretty but unpretentious chorus, others behind them will be backing it with these delicate little harmonising phrases, just as they do incidentally when Erica is singing. You'll have perhaps clarinet or cornet backing her with lovely little decorative phrases. So I much prefer that kind of soloing. Let us say you have the cornet doing 16 bars against stop chords, and then perhaps the trombone doing the other 16 bars against gentle harmonies from the cornet and the clarinet. That is far more interesting and pretty and lovely to listen to than just show-offs screaming around high notes. I also quite like to see the band play a quiet chorus occasionally, just keeping things delicate. Maybe even having a chorus where just the front line, the cornet, clarinet and trombone play and have a sort of nice conversation together. And this is particularly effective if you're going to build up afterwards to a more exciting, perhaps noisier sort of climactic chorus. So that's another idea. Tuba Skinny don't do it too often, but I do like it when I see that happening, a quiet chorus or a chorus in which only 3 instruments play. That sort of thing can be very, very effective. And then when the tune comes to the end, I like it to end well. With inferior bands, you so often have a terrible muddle at the end of the tune. Somebody like the trumpet player might think, oh, I'm going to add a coda or a few extra bars, but the others don't realise it, and so they suddenly, having put their instruments down, having to pick them up again to just join in with a final note or two. Or the band completely finishes and some clever dick thinks, oh, I'll add a little tag on, and again they've all got to pick their instruments up and try to play a final note. Well, that's messy, frankly. It can seem funny, but it's also it's not very smart. And I much prefer what Tuba Skinny do, where they have agreed very lovely endings. Sometimes they just come to a natural stop, but other times they have quite tricky little tags, but very impressive to listen to. And by the way, I'd like to say a word or two about what is called the rhythm section. That's to say banjo, guitar, some kind of bass, maybe piano, certainly maybe drums. The thing about them is that for a start they should be consistent in that they are all playing from the same chords, and there's no conflict of chords. There often is in some bands. And also, from the audience's point of view, it should be as if it's just one man playing all the instruments together, or at least one mind. So you just feel that it's a beautiful pulse and well harmonised and so on, coming through regularly without anybody dominating. And they should also have a wonderful understanding between themselves, so that if, for example, one of them is soloing, the others back down a little bit, but still provide wonderful support to that soloist. So a few words there about the rhythm instruments, and they can be very, very important in producing a wonderful performance, and certainly they are very, very strong, obviously, in Tuba Skinny. In some bands, I must admit, particularly, you get drummers who spoil things for everybody by being too noisy or by not keeping a really steady beat or slowing down, that sort of thing. Now finally, does it really matter to know much about music in order to appreciate what is a really great performance? Well, I'd like to say no, it doesn't really matter. You can just sit there and tap your feet and enjoy it, and that's largely true. But I do find, since I've been studying the music, which is a few years now, it does help to know where you are in the music, whether you're in theme A or theme B, or whether there's a break coming up in bars 7 and 8 and so on. And I've sort of trained myself to listen out for things like that, and I'm appreciating them more and more. And I do think it helps with my enjoyment of the music. You may have a different view on that and not think it's necessary, but it's if you understand the grammar and the structure of the music, and you see it being carried out with such perfection, then I think it does help. Well, friends, that's the end of my video. I'm sorry it's been a bit long and rambling, but there seemed to be such a lot to cover. I hope you've found it reasonably interesting and stimulating thoughts of your own. So if you've watched it all this far, thank you very much indeed. And from me for now, it's bye-bye.